The only thing I ever wanted to do was make records. Since it's a cliche, I couldn't be in the studio anymore. There's a lot of people with tinnitus and they can still work.
That is Luke Delalio, engineer, cognitive artist, painter, photographer, and now a big part of Korneff Audio. His story begins with a lifelong obsession with making records and evolves into a deeper question. What does creativity look like when the traditional path changes?
I sold everything and I just stopped working in the music industry completely. It was like a hard cut. It was right a couple of months after I met Dan Korneff.
That moment of pause became a turning point. It opened the door to a new way of building tools for music makers, shaped by real sessions and designed to solve the same problems engineers face every single day.
But I think probably most creative people are creative because they're bored. That seems to be a feature, not so much a bug.
By the end of this conversation, you'll learn how curiosity, experimentation, and a willingness to rethink the process shape Luke's work, and why some of the most innovative ideas come from refusing to do things the usual way. Stick around. I'm Bobby Owsinski, and this is the Inner Circle Podcast. You've done so much in your life, engineer, producer, musician, photographer, educator, director, playwright, so many different things. But as I understand it, a lot of that hinged upon you getting tinnitus.
Yeah, pretty much all of it. The only thing I ever wanted to do was make records. Since it's a cliche. I heard Revolver, and I was 13. It was the first album I ever bought was Revolver. Man, it blew my mind. By the time I got to She Said on the first side, and then you get to Tomorrow Never Knows, and it's just, what is this? So I started playing guitar around that time, but I was always much more interested in like the arrangements and what we were doing. So I started, I didn't even know what producing was, but I started being in charge. I would tell people what to do. And then I went to college and I went to Purdue for kind of audio engineering. It was theater sound design. I had the degree in theater sound design. So I have this theater background and I always acted. But I got into recording studios at college. And then when I got out, I just wanted to work in studios. I didn't probably jump on that as fast as I should have. My dad was kind of like, oh, you won't like that. And I was kind of stupid and I believed that. I was working a lot. I was producing all the time, engineering all the time, and teaching all the time. I didn't need sleep. I set up 5 Towns College's audio program and built their studios. And then what happened was I just was working too much and I never really worked loud. I was the quietest out of all of us. And I had my own speakers I towed around because I didn't want to get tinnitus. And then boom, I got tinnitus. At that time, you couldn't really talk about it. First of all, there was nobody to talk to. It was like if you said to somebody who was an engineer, I have tinnitus, it was like confessing your file, right? Like it just, no one wanted to even, and everybody kind of had it too, right? So, but no one wanted to talk about it. An opportunity came up to start directing plays, and I ended up running a college theater program. I was always messing around with audio and buying gear and guitars. It just never stopped. It's been my one true love.
But tinnitus made you take a left turn, right?
Yeah, I couldn't be in the studio anymore. My tinnitus, there's a lot of people with tinnitus and they can still work, like most of the industry.
Well, I'm one, yeah.
But not me. And I would walk into a space, my hearing would go into like super hearing mode. And then I'd hear everything and drums, and I could tell you what microphone was on what, but man, the tinnitus would just get overwhelmingly loud. So I had to stop. I sold everything and I just stopped working in the music industry completely. It was like a hard cut. It was really awful. It was right a couple of months after I met Dan Korneff, maybe a year after I met Dan Korneff. He was assisting. He was my assistant. And he was already so friggin' brilliant that one of my clearest thoughts when I was, giving up on the music biz was I should just hire Dan as my engineer and just produce and spend less time in the studio. And I didn't do that for whatever reason, probably, well, it worked out good for Dan, which is really important because he's always been just the smartest and kind of loveliest person. My mom died in 2019. Dan showed up at my mom's funeral and said, I'm setting up Korneff Audio. You want to come along? And I said, yeah. And it kind of mirrors something that happened much earlier to Dan. he wanted to set up a studio. He was leaving Five Towns and he wanted to set up a studio. And I was like, man, this is like 2000, 2002, maybe 2001. And I was thinking, like, you don't want to do that. We don't know where the industry's going to be. So I said, I'll get you a gig, Water Music in New Jersey. I know the owner. They'll take you. You'll be the head engineer within 6 months, and within a year, someone will take you away. And then you'll be a producer yourself, and it'll be done in 2 months, in 2 years. I think Dan got a kind of a gold record within 8 months or something like that, because he's that good.
Dan had this idea, and one of the things that Korneff is noted for is interesting approaches on plugins, interesting look, interesting workflow, all based on, and sometimes it's a vague piece of gear. Was that in the original plan?
That is pretty much mapped to Dan's thinking because he was always a tinkerer and someone who liked to play with things and experiment with things and build things. He makes his own solid state stuff, and he can make his own tube stuff. He can build like literally with a soldering iron kind of thing. So that was a lot of it from the beginning, and then a lot of it is both of us, probably me worse than him. I just the same thing over and over again. It's just so boring, So both of us are always trying to like find something different. We also both like obscure equipment, and we also both really like the history of things. And most of Korneff Audio is really about like the big studio experience. I mean, you remember those days where you'd be with the band in a recording studio, and it was so much fun, right? It could be tense, it could be the things it could be, but generally it was just hysterically fun. So much fun. And so a lot of what we do is about that vibe. And some of that vibe is the nature of, you go into a studio and there's a thing sitting there that you've never seen before, and it's got different colors, and it might be an EQ and maybe it's a Helios, but I don't quite know what this is. So you plug it in. So a lot of our thinking is that Dan always wants to come up with something that's kind of faster and easier. So Chocolate Milk, for instance, is sort of all about how do we get the sound of tape but make it more adjustable, because that's another thing. Both of us like to mess with stuff and tweak. How do we get the sound of tape without the negatives of tape? That thing works really well.
One of the things, if I can interject here, is on the surface, and I find this is super attractive about all the plugins. On the surface, they're easy. If you want to dig in, there's plenty of additional parameters underneath the hood. But you have to go underneath the hood. So it's not confusing at all what the plugin is supposed to do. I find that just amazingly attractive.
What is Dan saying on it? This reverse mullet, party in front, business out back.
Yeah.
That's very Dan. Like, he likes to mess with stuff. He's an inveterate tinkerer. And it's also fun, like back in the big studio days, you would mess with things. You wouldn't necessarily go around and screw with the circuits, but gosh, I was always playing with guitar pedals and figuring out if I didn't quite plug it in enough, you could do something with that. Or strange microphones, or weird amplifier combinations, or putting amps and mics near objects so you get all kinds of phase shift and, strange pedal chains. And that's like the real fun of being in a recording studio was all the experimenting. I was talking to a friend yesterday. We cut something by putting a pair of U87s out in a court. The courtyard had walls but no ceiling, so it had a very strange echo. Right? Like you were like, are we inside or outside? And there was a dog running around, and the lead singer cut this soft vocal while walking around in this weird stereo environment. And so it just happens right in the middle of the song. So our plugins are like always an attempt to kind of get that.
Let's talk about photography for a second. How did you get into that?
I always had cameras. My dad had good cameras, so I was always playing with cameras. And then when I started directing plays, I would bring a camera to shoot sort of pictures of whatever I was directing, the stage setups and stuff, just kind of from memory. And then kids, I started shooting people. I would shoot candidates of people during the play, and then they started using their candidates as headshots. So suddenly I'm shooting headshots professionally in New York City. And then I'm getting invited to shoot plays live. So I'm shooting live theater, and then I'm shooting concerts. And then I just started getting good, and I eventually got a job working at a newspaper as the head photographer. And so I kind of walked into it sideways. I can kind of do anything creative, especially if it involves something technical. Like that, my brain sits there really, really nicely.
Did you get bored?
With photography?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, the newsletter might just be the latest in a series of boredom evasions. Although it's been going on for 2 years, and so far I'm not really bored with it. It's really fun. But
I want to keep that going for sure.
oh, I thank you. I'm really flattered. I'm really, really flattered. Every time I write one, I think like, oh, this is so stupid. Everybody's going to hate this. Literally, that's what goes through my head. Like, oh my God, who cares about Boney M?
I've had that too with blog posts where you go, I have to write something today. Oh, this is awful.
Yeah.
Yet it gets a big, big response.
Yeah. I'm kind of surprised. I get kind of, fan mail, and it's always like, oh, hey, this, wow, going on for 2 years, and it's really not, it's always still a surprise that someone cares. Yeah.
Have you ever noticed that mixing vocals is often the hardest part of getting a track to sound right? You boost, you compress, you add effects, and it still doesn't feel professional. So, to make it easier, I put together a simple mini course on vocal mixing that walks you through the exact steps to get the vocals sounding clear and upfront. If you're interested, scan the QR code on screen or click the link in the show notes. Now, back to today's conversation. I saw somewhere, maybe it was on your website, about being awarded the Pulse magazine's, or being put on the VIP list of Pulse magazine. How did that happen?
I started painting and drawing, and a gallerist found me. I got a show at her gallery, and then she recommended me to the Long Island Pulse. And suddenly I'm in the Long Island Pulse as an artist, and I did not expect that. I was just really fulfilling a grad school requirement. I'm working on some paintings right now. I do sell. I sold a couple last month. I sold 2, kind of out of nowhere. I don't have a studio up here like I had at home, so if I was to show you the floor, there are like watercolor paintings all over the place behind me. Pretty bad.
A lot of things seem to happen to you, as you explained it, sideways.
I'm not sure if my approach informs recording and audio and music or vice versa. But back when making records, you'd start with a song and you'd put something down, and you couldn't swap out the drums necessarily. You were sort of stuck with that snare sound, and you sort of just had to play the cards as you were handed them, And I'm good at that. I'm good at reacting and improvising. I'm not a good planner, but I'm an improviser, and so a lot of life is improvised. And also, once the tinnitus kind of took music away, and making records as a really viable option for me, I kind of didn't care, at that point. It was kind of such a heartbreak. It was far more tragic for me than I probably ever let on. Like, it was devastating. It was like going through a divorce and a death, spinal bifida, and being paralyzed. Everything bad in one moment.
But could you do it now?
That's an interesting question, and I definitely field offers. And there are people I'd be interested in working with, and I do have a couple of things I'm really interested in working on, because the people are interesting and the music is interesting, and they're not trying to get the same snare sound as everybody else. I don't know that I could do it and my tinnitus wouldn't really ruin the quality of my life for however many weeks that would take. Like, I don't think my tinnitus can get permanently worse, right? Like, it's bad. There are days I don't even know I have it. I went for years where I basically didn't know I had it. came back with my mother's death. But I don't know that the day-to-day would be bearable. Because when tinnitus is bad, I almost can't even explain it. When tinnitus is bad, for me, I don't know where the day goes. It's like just a chunk of my life vanishes. And I'm a lot of people can't sleep with tinnitus. I can sleep. So I end up taking naps, and I'll take 5 or 6 naps a day for 3 days, and I get nothing done. And it's really horrifying. And especially as you get older, it's terrible. And I don't know that anything is kind of worth the horror of that.
See, for me, I've had it all of my adult life. I believe I got it playing in a loud band in high school.
Sure. Yeah.
I don't know for sure, but I think that's when it happened. And I've learned to live with it. And the only time it bothers me is when I hear someone talking about it or I read about it. And then it's like, oh, there it is. Otherwise, it may be there, maybe not. I don't notice. So I'm one of the lucky ones.
A lot of people have it. Dan has got spectacular hearing still. He's got the hearing of a 20-year-old. But it affects people differently. It's also, tinnitus is audible anxiety, right? Like, boy, if your life is tense and you've got a lot of difficult things you're dealing with, your tinnitus gets worse.
We're calling it tinnitus, and I've had a couple of experts on, and they always correct me and says, tinnitus, tinnitus.
I know you did a podcast with the guys from Tinnitus Quest.
Yes.
It's a terrible name because it makes it sound like you're going out in search of tinnitus.
Yeah, yes, right.
I have hope that there's a line of research into using psychedelics, similar treatment to what they're doing with people with PTSD, where they're using psychedelics to reframe the experience from being, I almost got killed by the Vietnamese with their mortars, to, oh, that was nothing, and I could see how, a lot of tinnitus is, it is wrapped up in anxiety, and it's a warning. It's a danger sound, and your body pays attention to something that sounds dangerous, right? Like your body doesn't pay attention to a clock, but it if it hears someone cock a shotgun or a tiger, like your hearing wakes right up. So if tinnitus is viewed as a danger signal and something with all this crap attached to it, your body hears it. And your ears really give it a lot of emphasis. And if it doesn't, if you can, I guess the idea is get blown out of your mind and have a great time listening to your tonight. I'm not a fan of drugs at all. But that does seem to be one of the more promising things.
I have a friend who's a therapist who, for a while, specialized in ketamine research, and which she doesn't do now because apparently the research says that it's not as effective as they thought it was, and there are other more effective ways. But nonetheless, I'm going to bring this up to him about the tinnitus and if he knows anything about how, the drug has affected it or anything he's working on. So it should be interesting. I never thought of it to mention it to him.
That would be really interesting to me. We'll have to chat about that.
Speaking of things to chat about, let's talk about the new plugin.
The new plugin being chocolate milk, or the new one that comes out on Monday, or the new one that comes out in about a month?
Your choice, but remember this is coming out around NAMM, so. Well,
you can pick. We have something coming out Monday, and I know you're not necessarily a fan of old plugins, or redos of like, oh, we need another 1176. You're not a fan of that either. But what we do have coming out on Monday is a Siemens Citral W295 EQ. This is kind of a rare piece. There are a couple other companies that have worked on it, but they are not anywhere in the same neighborhood as ours in terms of the modeling going on and the sheer features going on and the way it sounds. And this came about because years and years ago, Dan was in a studio and he heard these things and he's like, oh, I'd like these. And they were so expensive. So it occurred to him to make it. So we've been messing around with this thing for over a year, and I can send you one. It is definitely the best sounding digital EQ I've ever heard. Our beta testers are all kind of like, oh my God, this thing sounds amazing. And it has the way we're modeling stuff now. So with an analog piece of gear, when you change anything in the electrons are ripping around that thing at the speed of light, right? Just under the speed of light. So if you change the entire circuit changes across the entire piece of gear, across the entire signal chain, right? You plug a different microphone in. There's a measurable effect throughout the system in a split second. And most digital plugins are built to work sequentially, so there's a preamp process that feeds it to a EQ circuit, feeds it to a compression circuit. But an analog circuit, all that would be happening at once. So if you started changing the EQ parameters here, the impedance of the whole system changes, the circuitry literally changes, the voltages change. And it happens at the input, it happens at the output, it happens throughout the entire thing. And that's the way better plugins are modeled. But like to model that, you need a lot of processing power, or you need to be really cagey with how you're going to use your resources and the way you look at those equations. But what Dan's been doing is pretty much the latest and greatest way of doing that. It's called state space modeling. Basically, you have all these different equations for each part of the circuit all being solved in real time at once. And that happens at 96,000 times a second, or 44.1 thousand times, whatever the sample rate is. So it can be very processor intensive. But changing a mid-range EQ affects the higher EQ and the lower EQ. It affects the shelves. These things all interact with each other. So it just seems to work and sound like way more like an analog thing. It has that sort of living quality. So that's the Citral, and that came out in the past. That comes out around January 5th. So I was writing the newsletter, and one of the albums I'm really interested in is a record called Love Forever Changes, a 1967 psychedelic masterpiece done by Bruce Botnick at Sunset Sound, one of my favorite records. So I'm writing about that, and I'm trying to figure out what console was it mixed on. And I can't find anything. And finally, I stumble into this name I never heard before called Sound Techniques. Have you ever heard of the Sound Techniques console?
It was a British console. As a matter of fact, it was reintroduced at AES a few years ago. Yeah, right.
If you go on the web and you're just like if you're industry and you happen to know this, you know this, but honestly, most people in the industry don't know anything about Sound Techniques. And you start looking at the history of Sound Techniques. This is the console that first one went to, they were in studios, Lane Leah in London. Hendrix cut his first album on a Sound Techniques console. And they got over Trident, a lot of Abbey Road, a lot of the White Album was cut on a Sound Techniques. Dear Prudence was cut on a Sound Techniques. Hey Jude was cut on a Sound Techniques. They were at Trident. Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars, Hunky Dory, all those records were cut on a Sound Techniques. Trident makes it seem like they were cut on a Trident, but they weren't. They were all cut on this Sound Techniques. And even once they had a Trident console working, they were still using a Sound Techniques in the mix room. And then Tutti Camarada bought a Sound Techniques, brought it to Sunset Sound, then brokered another one into Elektra. So then Sound Techniques were used on all the Doors records, Exile on Main Street, lots of Led Zeppelin, Led Zeppelin 2, Led Zeppelin 4 were cut on Sound Techniques consoles, and in some cases mixed on Sound Techniques consoles. So I thought this was the most fascinating thing. And I chased down the owner of the company, Danny White. And I was like, we'd love to make a plugin. And he wasn't particularly enthusiastic about it at first. He was actually kind of standoffish, but then he called back, and after a couple months, and so we've been building a Sound Techniques plugin based on it's awesome. It's the only one in the world, and it's a really, really interesting circuit. They did a lot of interesting engineering in it. The positive waveform, going through the circuit, there's the positive side of the waveform and the other side of the waveform. The processing is sort of asymmetrical. And this happens a lot, like asymmetrical clipping is kind of a thing. But this whole board was kind of set up to do that. And then it has inductor-based EQs. which can do the Pultec thing. You can boost and cut in the same ranges. It's a really interesting sounding EQ. And just overall, the whole channel strip sounds terrific. And to do it, so we got our hands on all of the blueprints, and Danny White's been great. He has all of that stuff. He's a true collector of this stuff. He loves it. So we have that. And then he and another guy named Ken Pearsall put together this literally doesn't exist. It is the channel strip that's off of either Sunset Sound, Electra, or Trident. Like there's one in the world. It's like sitting in our office now. I'm like, we get to measure. So it's really, really cool. So that is like we've been working on this since a couple months after NAMM last year. So we actually have that coming out. And to be able to be part of that history, to be able to tell that story, to be able to introduce a generation of people who just don't know how those records were made. And that this thing was so essential. It's crazy. Like you go to the Sound Techniques website, he's got a list, we'll eventually have it too, of all the records done on a Sound Techniques console. They had all the hits for a long, long time. You're So Vain, Sound Techniques. All these Elton John records, Sound Techniques. All these Queen records, Sound Techniques. It's crazy. It's really, really crazy.
Yeah, I know they brought Ken Scott out to... this was 2 years ago or 3 years ago when they debuted it as sort of the face of someone who used it a lot.
There's the Sound Techniques at Boulevard recording in LA. And then they're also making the modules with Sunset Sound. They're doing a Sunset Sound module. It has one of the things that's really cool about it, and it goes back to what I was talking about earlier with the interconnectedness of a circuit, is and when we were playing with this, you could hear it. You can adjust the impedance of the device. It has like 6 settings to adjust the impedance, and it makes every single microphone sound different, right? You plug a microphone in, you can switch through, and it's like everything changes. And when you get the impedance right, that's what that microphone actually sounds like. But if you feel like screwing around with it, you change kind of, mics sort of have a compression characteristic. You sort of change that. It's really, really cool. Really, really cool. So we have all that, of course, modeled.
I'm looking forward to that one.
Oh, it's going to be good. Yeah. And that should be out for NAMM, like it's a little tight, but I think we'll do it. And we have some other plugins with it. We sort of made a Sound Techniques suite of some very rare things. We took the Sound Techniques preamp circuit, and Dan figured out if you dropped opto into the negative feedback loop, you could turn it into an optical compressor, and it does not sound like an LA3 or an LA2. It's the one thing that optical compressors aren't, which is punchy. Like it's a great drum compressor. So yeah, and we're going to put the Sound Techniques name on that. So it's the Korneff Audio Sound Techniques opto compressor. Yeah, it's marvelous.
There's 2 ways to look at it. You can look at it as a tool. You can look at the macro vision of AI, how it's affecting record labels and artists and things like that. And there's 2 different things that are happening. On a macro level, I think what's happening is, or it should be happening, is that artists should be rebelling against their major record labels for the deals recently done with Suno and Udio. The fact that when they find out that their likenesses and their songs are available for training and all that stuff, if I were a manager, I'd be trying to pull out my artist from any deal from that. On a tools level, some of the tools are fantastic, especially the separation tools and the noise reduction. Other than that, I'm not terribly impressed, to be honest with you.
The things I've heard people make with AI have been pretty much awful. And it seems to be gravitating towards country, right? So many people make it and not that country needs to be any worse. Because already just as a genre, and I love a lot of traditional country music, but I love Jerry Jeff Walker, but boy, it's gotten formulaic. All pop music has gotten formulaic, and something like Suno or any sort of AI thing it's formulaic, excellent. I can process that, And I don't see how that's going to be good for creativity. I don't see how the whole thing is good for people. Like, I've always been about developing skills, like I became an engineer, I became a guitar player, I became a photographer, I learned how to paint, I learned how to write. Dan knows how to solder things. We have this Gen X philosophy of learn how to do it, learn how to do it. And that seems to be out the window with AI. Like, I don't see how learning how to write a prompt, and I hate that word prompt, right? Because a prompt is like, go talk to her, it's a prompt, right? Like, it's like a nudge. These are instruction sets, right? Like, I'm good at writing instruction sets. And if you start saying, like, I'm an instruction set engineer as opposed to a prompt engineer, I think you start getting closer to where the human is in the equation, and really you're not too different than someone feeding punch cards in. It's a verbal punch card. And I find that scary. I find that bad, because I think the point of life is to better yourself, is to get better at doing things, being able to take care of yourself, being able to create and express yourself with the fruit of your own hands and your own mind. I don't see how AI helps us do that. I see how it makes some people richer. I don't see how it helps humanity in general to be better. It might help us to live longer, but for what? So we can scroll and buy stuff? I don't.
Yes, right. Yeah, that's great. I love that. Yeah.
I don't see where the philosophy of life is in this thing. And it's the entire American economy, right? Is the world's economy is going towards 7 companies right now who have this whack-ass experiment. Like, we're going to change humanity. Well, how? Well, we're not sure. Well, put you guys in charge. I didn't vote for this. This is crazy,
Luke, there's a lot of evidence about that ending, about a big pushback happening, and it's happening with the younger generations, believe it or not, because they're more into this authenticity than they are into perfection.
Absolutely.
This is something we can go down a rabbit hole and talk about for a long time, but I want to end with this. This is the question I ask everybody. What's the best piece of advice that maybe you received along the way, or maybe something that you figured out?
If I look at my life and I think of what I regret, the thing I regret the most is times when I have not been kind. It can almost make me tear up. Actually, my crying on the podcast. For me, the times I've been unkind are the moments I regret the most in my life. So people say, like, oh, I regret the things I didn't do. I do that too, but the things that really get under my skin are the moments when I've been unkind. I kind of think if everybody was just 10% kinder in the simplest ways, from holding doors to not saying fucking stupid things to people online. Like, there's so many ways to just be nice. And I think that would make the world a lot better. And then in terms of like a career or something like that, I don't think anybody right now could give advice about a career. Who knows? I think I'm stuck at try to be kinder.
Actually, that's something that I think everybody can practice without a problem at all, without having thinking too hard. So that's a good philosophy, and also a good place to stop. Thanks for listening and being in my inner circle. Remember, if you have any questions or comments, you can send them to questions@bobbyowsinski.com. You can also learn all about the latest in music, audio, and production news, and find out about openings for my latest online classes at bobbyowsinski.com. This is Bobby Owsinski. I will see you next time.